It is a spiritual gift.
Some days it's very calm and gentle, and then other days it can be fierce and deadly.
It's a good place to ease your mind and just forget about everything, and it's lovely out here, I think.
There just ain't no better place than the old river.
The Missouri River is probably the most unique river in North America.
Without it, no one really know what this place is.
Everybody who comes here has heard of this river. It kind of puts us on the map.
Atchison would not be much if we didn't have the river.
The river is, it's almost like a statue, but it's not. It's a monument, because everyone comes here a lot just to see the river.
Well, the city wouldn't be here if the river wasn't here.
The Missouri River has been part of the fabric of their existence for a long time.
The Kansas Indians came to this area about the early 1600s. They came out to the plains to find a new place to settle. They found this area, it was right on the Missouri River, and they picked this place along Independence Creek, right in this valley where Atchison now sits today. The one thing they always talked about was the abundance here. The same things that later people would find making this attractive, the Kansas found attractive. They stayed here well over a century. So there was a huge amount of resources that they were able to tap into. When the long expedition came up to go to the Yellowstone, they brought the first steamboat to this part of the world. They brought this steamboat that was shaped like a dragon, spurting fire out its nose, and it was entirely designed to impress the Native Americans and to get better trade agreements with them, basically. So in 1819, that's the last written account of the Kansas still being in what is now Atchison County. The next time you really see this bend on the river being an influence is in the time period around 1849. George Million set up a ferry right across the river on the Missouri side, and he made a good living transporting all the 49ers heading to California. So when Kansas opened to settlement, this was a known location because the Missouri River makes this grand detour, setting it about 12 miles further west when you get off the river than any place else. They built the infrastructure you had to have here to be able to become a major outfitting center. And that's what turned Atchison into this outfitting town, and that's really where everything began. So Atchison people made their money in this first year, the riverboats, the outfitting people and selling them, stagecoach tickets and wagons. And then they immediately reinvested that in railroads. In 1870, the railroads were coming and saying, we need a bridge. We don't want to have to transport everything on a ferry anymore. And Atchison came to their senses about 5 years later, built the bridge that still is there in 1875. So 5-year span gave advantage to these other three communities, and suddenly we were not the railroad center, we had competition. We held that advantage through the 1890s. If those people who made all that money in the early outfitting and the riverboat era hadn't immediately turned over their investment and went towards railroads, and then later in the 1930s to building a modern car bridge, Atchison would be much different than it is today. This bridge got built right in the middle of the Great Depression. It was called the Mocan Free Bridge because there was no toll. That free was vitally important, and Atchison perked up again after that bridge was built. And then, of course, in the 60s and 70s, Atchison's downtown did what every downtown did in the country. The suburbs took over. You have flight out of the middle of the city and the city's downturn.
The railroad bridge there, because it's lower, there's a lot of ships that, in order to get past it, the bridge will swing. But it used to be, you saw it getting swung fairly often to let some boat through. The last few years, the amount of traffic has just dwindled to where it's exceedingly rare to see that anymore.
This is another little dock, so to speak, that come out where they would tie off their barges to it too. So, there used to be, when I was little, there were barges tied off here. That's how they moved the grain up and down the river.
used to be a prosperous city. One of the richest towns in the U.S., believe it or not, at one time, but it died down and it's now in the shadow of its own doubt. Basically, the river and Atchison have their own connection. They're both declining.
The new bridges are just as important today as the old bridges were then. So we're hoping today, brand new bridge, we hope that that's going to do that same thing again for the modern era. It's going to provide a boom for industry. I think that's the big change in the river, is that we don't look at it the same way anymore. And I think there's very few people who really remember Atchison as a river town. You know, that some people remember when there was a commercial fisherman. There's Jody Van Horn, was one of the last commercial fishermen in this area.
When I was a young feller, about 8 years old, right in there, Dad and I come down on the river there, and we were sitting just up above the Van Horns. And all of a sudden, my dad sets the hook, and nothing moves. And so he pulls a little more on it. Well, he says, I got old Jody down there. And I'm thinking, Jody? I don't see no one down there. I said, who's Jody? Well, he said, the Van Horns, they commercial fish along here. And you follow your string where it goes into the water, and he's pulling it up, you know, and you can see it raise the hoop of the net. And so then the questions come out, what's that all about? And you know, that was when I got educated on what commercial fishing was all about. And so that's, through the years, you know, it was always something I wanted to do. Back about 14 years ago, a good friend of mine and I bought our nets and got our license, and we started commercial fishing. The laws had changed from when Van Horns were doing it to when I got into it, that you couldn't take the game fish out of the river anymore. You could only take the rough fish.
You couldn't make a living hunting and fishing this day and age, that's for sure.
There's this change happening. You have this most important geographic feature of the Americas runs literally right through our town, and we ignore it.
It still has an enormous amount of potential. It's just that if you look at the things been used for in the past, a lot of those are kind of outdated. But you look at how far people will travel for recreation. And here you've got this great resource there. And it's utilized somewhat. In the summertime, you know, they've got a public dock down there in front of Atchison, and it gets used. You see people out there, jet skis and water skis and stuff. But it's not developed, I don't think, nearly to the extent that it could be.
We need to, first of all, make sure we're more aware of it, because, you know, you've been here so long, it's just there.
The Missouri River here used to be, you know, maybe 10 times as wide as it is now, and we've channelized it a great deal.
When they had the flood, and I want to say, I think it was either 57 or 58, somewhere around in there, they started changing things.
They started building water dam to hold the water, control the water when we had a lot of rains, and then the rivers could be at a high level, and we could contain that water back so we didn't flood the city out again.
If we respect the river, we need to give it room to be a river.
The river, when it behaves itself and does what it's supposed to do, is wonderful for us, but just like any place else that has one, if it doesn't, if things are out of control, then it makes a very, very large negative impact on what's going on.
The inside of the river that you're trying to contain, you know, you're building it too narrow. So what's going to happen is eventually the land you're trying to protect is going to be lower than the level of the river. You don't have to have an education to be able to predict what's going to happen.
They've tried to harness that old river. They haven't ever harnessed it yet, even with the dams upstream.
Once they kind of channelized the river, the floods were far less frequent, but when they happened, they were disastrous.
What we had 3 years ago, the economic impact was much greater because it lasted a lot longer. We had 3.5 months without a bridge across the river. It was because of the release of water up north, and we had no control over it, and yet at the same time, there was nowhere for the water to go. It couldn't go back down because they just kept releasing water.
Obviously, we weren't doing some things right. One of the things that many people perceived that we could do better was try to remove some of the obstructions in the floodplain so that the river would have a place for the water to go when it does flood. So there are a number of us that a growing number of people that want to try to live in harmony with the river rather than to control it. The mitigation, like at Benedictine Bottoms, was to foster a scientific laboratory for people to learn more about the ecosystem and how it functions. And with Dolby Bottoms, we've tried to restore a large section of bottomland to a semi-natural state. There's a lot of people that might appreciate having access to that native flora and fauna.
The Missouri River has gone from being the highway to now the byway, the way we think of the scenic route that you go to find enjoyment in nature.
Without the river, I wouldn't have the opportunity to come out here, take a look at the fall leaves. You just see nature at its best out here. You see things out here that you don't see inland.
I've seen long-legged birds. I don't have a clue what they are, but I know that they were there because of the river. I just like the wildlife that is here because of the river.
It's become more and more popular. They're going to have a catfish open championship.
Last year we had 48 boats on the river fishing catfish for a day. They catch some pretty big ones, so it's kind of fun to watch. It's a catch and release tournament, so all those fish go right back in. When they all start coming in and bringing those fish in, it's fun. It makes everybody so much more aware of what's down there. And I was down there at 7 o'clock last year when they went out on the river, and it's still a little bit dark. So you got 48 boats, all with their little lights on. It was kind of hazy and foggy over the river. Oh my gosh, it was absolutely beautiful. It just amazes me what a picture of the river can do to people. Rivers are pretty powerful.
As an artist, it is a source of inspiration. We've painted the river, we've sketched the river, we've photographed the river using what's already there. It is a continual inspiration.
Anything we can find from the driftwood, but also man-made, anything that it brings up from the bottom. So that's where we're going with our art, and I'm discovering everything that's in the river.
Nighttime lightning storms, this is spectacular because you get a 180-degree view. You can see lightning going on all the way around, and it's breathtaking. Nobody had driven by on the road yet, and I wasn't about to go outside, so I just took it from the bedroom window. So I've got all 4 seasons from that window.
If you have a well-managed piece of water, a river, it can feed you, it can clothe you, it can produce all kinds of things, and it also can give you emotional satisfaction. You need water for mental health. Water has a soothing effect to the spirit of mankind.
When things just seem to get tough, this is my getaway. I always go back to nature, so I can come out on the river, and the river takes me back to Dad and I fishing along the river and him hooking old Jody, as he called it. It can be just one of the most beautiful things that the Lord put down here for us to be on. My way of relieving that tension is coming out and sitting on the river, or maybe being with my son-in-law, Danny, over there, kind of getting me soft. Being able to bring the grandkids out, and teach them everything I was taught. So it does for me.
The river has been very important to Atchison in the past and hopefully in the future.
Every small community worries about the future more and more all the time, I think. We need to involve it more in what we do. Show our community as well as other people how important the river is, and probably be more appreciative of having it.
It's our water source, and so I would say, if anything, protect it. Protect it and care for it.
If the proper care is taken to clean up the river, more revenue, more activities, this town could thrive again.
I feel very definitely that we can have a very productive local economy in Atchison, Kansas by living in harmony with the river rather than trying to exploit it. We need to appreciate the spiritual gift which has been offered to us, the Missouri River.
Finally today, we've started to recognize it's a resource. It is a natural area, something that we can enjoy every day. Maybe we're finally catching up with something The Kansas Indians realized hundreds of years ago that this was a very resource-rich area, a beautiful area, and it just takes us living here today 300-400 years to recognize it.
We need to take care of the river and share the river.
Take me back to the river, flows through my hometown. When the clouds are rolling slow and there's nobody else around. Take me back to the river on a lazy day, when the leaves are falling down and there's nobody in our way. I need a little clear spot, I need a little space. There's no room to even think in this screaming place. So take me back to the river, where everything makes sense and everything you might